Okay, so we're returning to the wisdom books this morning. If any of you were here or listened online the last time I spoke, we were in Proverbs. And today we're not in Proverbs, but we're still in the wisdom books. So one of the things that I love about the wisdom literature in the Bible is how it illustrates God's understanding and care for our plight. And when I say the wisdom literature or the wisdom books, I'm referring to Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And while these books are very distinct from one another and can stand alone, they're best read together. They're best read as a whole, because when they're read together, they paint a pretty thorough picture of what wisdom is and how it can direct our lives. The last time I was here speaking, I introduced this little mini-series by speaking about Proverbs, which I characterized as the optimistic one, the optimistic book. Because the vibe of Proverbs is young, bright-eyed, full of potential, and the image of the world it paints is fair and balanced. If you do the right thing and order your life in the right way, you will have a good life. And sure, if you get rid of outside factors beyond your control, when all things are equal, the image that Proverbs paints can be true. If you make wise decisions and have your priorities in order, your life will generally improve. And according to Proverbs, the first step in doing that is orientating your life toward God. And that's, Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. Makes sense. Put God first, follow his way, seek his guidance. Done. Good life. But what do we do when we observe the opposite? How do we wrestle with suffering, with pain, with unjust experiences? What do we do when life just doesn't seem fair and pain seems inevitable? Do we throw out Proverbs? We get mad, be like, lied to me. Not the way it's supposed to be. No, that's why the wisdom books are not just Proverbs. We turn to Ecclesiastes, which in a lot of ways is sort of like the cynical one, because it addresses the reality that life can be random, brief, and meaningless, or at least feel that way. And as a result, sometimes life doesn't look like the picture that Proverbs paints. And then we can also turn to Job, which we will do next week, where a specific person, the namesake of the book, Job, grapples with this reality in his own life and what that means about the character of God. So, before we dig into the scripture, let's look at the background of Ecclesiastes. I often do background. I try to make it not too academic. The background of Ecclesiastes is pretty academic, so bear with me, but it is important. I think it's worth reflecting on. So Ecclesiastes introduces itself as a collection of words from somebody often referred to as the preacher, right? The first chapter does this. And though preacher is an okay translation of the original Hebrew word, it's not perfect. It's based on a Septuagint Greek translation of a Hebrew word. So it's not like a translation of the Hebrew, it's a translation of the Hebrew. So a couple degrees of separation. And translation is interpretation, full stop. That's why it's so important to read multiple translations of the Bible. Please read multiple translations of the Bible. Words shift meanings over time. There's an art to translation, so translation is a form of interpretation. So when we have a translated word that's multiple degrees removed, it's worth looking at the original. And the original Hebrew word for the, I don't want to say author of Ecclesiastes, because the last chapter suggests that it's not the only author of Ecclesiastes, but the speaker in Ecclesiastes anyway is Kohelet. And a better translation of Kohelet would bring about an image of a person who seeks wisdom and collects wisdom and sayings and shares them with people, maybe like students of some sort. So it's more of like a philosopher or a sage or a teacher than a preacher. And strictly speaking, Kohelet is not a name. It's not a personal name. It's like a title, sort of. And so technically, Ecclesiastes is written or attributed to somebody anonymous. However, in the first verse, that anonymous person is introduced as the son of David, king in Jerusalem, which suggests Solomon. However, the textual references within Ecclesiastes refer to like a historical background that doesn't really line up with the time period where Solomon lived. And the linguistic attributes of Ecclesiastes, the type of language used, suggests it was written much later than Solomon. If there was a book and it was written in the type of English I'm speaking, you wouldn't think that it was by somebody like Chaucer, right? It's English, but the way I'm speaking would suggest that it's English located in this century and not centuries past. And that's true with the Hebrew used in Ecclesiastes. So it probably wasn't written by Solomon. It might have been. I'm not staking a claim here, but it may have been written by somebody who was taking on the persona of Solomon in order to firmly locate the book as wisdom literature. And that doesn't diminish the importance or impact of Ecclesiastes. It's not misleading. It's a type of literary device, right? Like sometimes you can read something and it can be in a different point of view, and the truth of it is still there. So it's okay if it wasn't written by Solomon. It's still a valuable book to read. It's still part of the wisdom literature. And for me, the potential background, the potential historical location when Ecclesiastes was written makes it more meaningful, because the language suggests that it may have been written in a post-exilic Hellenistic period. So what that means for us is that it was likely written by a person who lived in a time and place defined by uncertainty, exploitation, and a new economic reality that was turning Jewish expectations of the world on its head. The people who this book was originally written for and spoken to might have been under the thumb of unjust Ptolemaic kings in a new economy that created large wealth gaps and caused many farmers and families to be dispossessed from their properties. And that's why I think the context is important, to recognize that it might be coming, probably is coming, out of a situation that's very uncertain and destabilized. Traditional clan and familial-based social expectations are being lost in the pursuit of wealth and power, and the people most negatively affected by those changes were practically helpless and unable to stop these negative impacts. And if that doesn't sound a little bit like now, I don't know what does. So that's why I think that the possibility that it wasn't written by Solomon and that it was written centuries later in this very specific historical kind of location makes it even more relatable for us. But it's not a hill I'm going to die on. So it's nice background, but if it's a stumbling block for you, that's okay. Ignore it. The text can speak for itself. That context does shed some light, though, on how bleak the first chapter of Ecclesiastes sounds, right? If it is written for a people who are grappling with how the old rules that they built their lives around don't seem to apply any longer, and if it is written for a people that felt powerless under this new order of things, and if it is written for a people who maybe are realizing that the promises of Proverbs didn't seem to matter anymore, it may have felt to them like nothing mattered. And that kind of makes sense for chapter 1, starting with vanity of vanities, right? And that nothing matters. So let's get into it. Let's look into chapter 1 now. It's a long passage. I'm going to read all of chapter 1. I'm reading from the ESV, but again, multiple translations are good, so if you're reading from a different translation, that's fine. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. vanity of vanities, all is vanities. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, "See, this is new"? It has already been in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I've acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Yikes. It does sound like a person who's given up a little bit, right? Why bother? Nothing's working. It's all useless. I'm just going to go to bed. And that's a potential purpose of the passage, just to relate to that, just to have something that speaks to that human experience, because I'm sure we've all felt that way. But another potential purpose of this passage could be an attempt to criticize and subvert this new norm that Jewish people were living under in a Ptolemaic state that was defined by a pursuit of economic profit and productivity. There's a lot of mention of toiling and how useless toiling is, and profit and gain, and how useless profit and gain is. And if you're a person who is being forced to live under a new economic reality where you don't have much say or power, then maybe toiling is kind of useless and profit and gain is kind of useless. And maybe the author is trying to reorient your heart toward things that matter, that are less temporal and more eternal. The writer is speaking to a society built around work and productivity and tells them that in the end, it doesn't matter. There's no progress, just ceaseless and presumably useless activity with no promise of profit. But again, I told you that I wasn't going to die on the hill on Ecclesiastes being written by somebody living in a Ptolemaic state. So what if it wasn't? Why would it start so bleakly? And we aren't living under a Ptolemaic state, so what can we take from the passage? Well, I think regardless of the context of its writing, this passage challenges our human nature and predisposition to seek wealth, knowledge, and power, as well as our propensity to try and take control over our lives through wealth, knowledge, and power. I think it speaks to our pride. And there's a pervasive idea that I know I fall into sometimes. I have anxiety. I really care a lot about safety. I have all these things I do to feel okay. And so I think it speaks to that propensity to grab and hold on to safety, security, legacy, destiny, and to do it through temporal means that we can control. This passage forces us to face the grim reality that sometimes we can't control things, that sometimes things don't make sense. Sometimes there's nothing we can do to guarantee success. Sometimes the picture painted by Proverbs doesn't come true. Sometimes we can do all the right things at the right time and use all our energy to do it, and it won't matter. Sometimes human existence feels meaningless, and although we know God has a purpose for us, it can be hidden, and that can be discouraging. And this is a human reality that I think we've all experienced at one point or other in our lives. And when we are in those moments, hearing advice that's full of quick fixes and naive positivity, just manifest something positive, just pray more, just get a different job, just work more, just move to a different neighborhood, like these quick kind of fixes can fall flat. And that to me is part of the beauty of Ecclesiastes. It doesn't shy away from these moments, it meets us in these moments. And it reminds us that we're not alone in these moments, and that these moments are as old as time, that people have felt this way before. And when we get to the ending of Ecclesiastes, you'll see that it reminds us that God is still in it. To quote Anthony R. Soresco, Kohelet sharply critiques the often overconfident self-assurance of those who are too quick to offer pat formulas for success or give glib answers to profound human problems. It reminds us that sometimes we just have to weather the storm, trusting that God is with us even when we don't feel his presence. And that's easier to do together and not alone, and it's easier to remember that others have been there, that others have borne difficult seasons, and that faith perseveres. So on the note of seasons, let's jump ahead to chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes. It's very long. I'm just going to read the classic bit, verses 1 to 8. But the whole chapter is great. The whole book is great. Ecclesiastes is really meant to be read as a whole. It's 12 chapters. It won't take very long. It's a journey. It brings you on a journey. So it is really meant to be read cover to cover. And so if you have time, I encourage you to do it. But for now, chapter 3, verses 1 to 8. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Everything happens in its season. This is a powerful metaphor. It's a powerful reminder of how little control we have over our lives. I would love for it to remain summer or fall forever. Everything I like is summer and fall. I like fall colors. I like being on the water. I like warm. I like barbecues. I like concerts. I like baseball. Everything I like is summer and fall. I don't like a single thing about winter. Not one thing. Nothing. A friend of mine asked what I was going to do this winter to give myself a distraction from it. And I joked, 90% joking, that probably I would just fall into a pit of depression and wait for summer. Probably I'll just sleep until it's summer. So the season's a reminder of how little control I have. I can't control whether winter comes or not. It just does. It doesn't matter how much I will it not to. And I can't control when it leaves. I can hope it's like early March. It never is. It always just comes back for a second. My husband Tyler loves winter. We disagree on this. Anyways. Seasons, the metaphor of seasons, remind us that we don't have control over our lives. And that's what Ecclesiastes is doing here. And on the one hand, this can lead to resignation. If there's nothing I can control, then why bother? What am I doing here? On the other hand, it can lead to hope. If God can control the seasons, and the stars, and the oceans, and the wind, and the rain, and the lightning, and everything else, then he's certainly in control of the seasons of our lives, even the difficult ones. And how great is that? Because he loves us, and desires our good, and has a purpose for us. So when we're in the thick of a season filled with joy, we can respond to God with gratitude for his sovereignty and blessing. And when we're in the thick of a season filled with sorrow or suffering, we can respond to God with gratitude for his sovereignty and blessing, because he will deliver us out of it. And that, I think, is hope. He is still with us. And we may often remember other passages of the Bible that speak to this truth. A lovely example, a famous example, Psalm 23:4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. In a dark season that we wish didn't happen, we are not alone. And I think that it's this reality, this hope, that informs the way Ecclesiastes concludes. Jumping ahead, chapter 12, last two verses, it's all kind of bleak, and the last two verses are less bleak. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. So then, after seeing everything, Kohelet tells us that God is still worth it. It's still worth serving God. After seeing the unjust gain through corruption, after seeing the just suffer, after seeing the apparent vanity of human striving and accomplishment, after recognizing how he may not fully understand God's ways or purposes, Kohelet does not give up on God. He does not sink into despair and nihilism. He does not give up on life. He does not give up on believing in justice and goodness. He knows the author of both those things, and though he may not always see God at work, he trusts that God is indeed at work. And that requires a humble acknowledgement of the limits of our own perspective. We have limited knowledge and foresight. We only see what's right in front of us or directly around us in our sphere of influence. We don't see with an eternal perspective. We don't see past, present, and future all at once. We don't see the full implication of any action, but we know the one who does, and we are loved by him. When I preached on Proverbs, I ended it by saying that Jesus is wisdom personified, and I connected his life to the life that Proverbs describes. That's still true here with Ecclesiastes. Jesus is wisdom personified. When I think of Jesus' life and I try to connect it to Ecclesiastes, I wonder if the disciples might have felt like Kohelet or his original intended audience in the time between Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. Jesus told the disciples what was about to happen, but their temporal focus meant they didn't quite understand the how or the why or the when. So Jesus' death must have felt so unfair and unjust. If I were a disciple at that time, I certainly would have felt like life was meaningless. If Jesus could be crucified after living a perfect life, what was the point of serving God? He was wise and it didn't matter. He was perfect and it didn't matter. He was good and it didn't matter. It must have felt like sin had won. Until the resurrection. On this side of the cross, we get the full picture. When the resurrected Jesus appears to complete the gospel story, it all makes sense. Life is not meaningless. It is not temporal. There is an eternal reality, and it is worth seeking. So who best personifies God's wisdom in the midst of a social reality that seems to counter his will? Who best personifies God's justice and mercy, conquering sin and injustice through a tool that symbolizes death and defeat, the cross? Who flips conventional wisdom and easy, glib answers to deep, profound struggles and questions? Who best answers the call of a hurting people and meets them in their sin, in their sorrow, in order to deliver them out of it? Who best lived out trusting God's will in the midst of suffering? Jesus on the cross and Jesus resurrected. And all of it done for our sake, all of it done because of our sin and for our reconciliation with a God who loves us. What a beautiful thing.